first draft of my first feminist book, Ain't I a Woman? Black Women and Feminism, when I was 19. It was published almost 10 years later. In those 10 years, I became more and more involved in creating feminist theory. Often when individuals talk or write about contemporary feminist movement, they make it seem as though there was a set body of feminist principles and beliefs that served as a foundation from the very beginning. In actuality, when feminist uprising began to occur in the late 1960s, it manifested itself in diverse settings among women who often had no knowledge of one another's existence. There was no clearly defined platform. While Betty Friedan was writing about the problem that has no name, addressing the way sexist discrimination affected highly educated white women with class privilege, Septima Clark, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Ann Moody, along with individual black women across the nation, were challenging the sexism within black civil rights movement. Appropriating the vernacular of black liberation, white women called their resistance to sexism women's liberation. We do not know who first used the term women's liberation. That is not important. Significantly, what we know from charting the history of contemporary feminist movement is that individual women were rebelling against sexism all over the place. When those women began to meet and talk together, that collective rebellion came to be known as women's liberation and would later evolve into feminist movement. Feminist struggle takes place anytime, anywhere, any female or male resists sexism, sexist exploitation, and oppression. Feminist movement happens when groups of people come together with an organized strategy to take action to eliminate patriarchy. I came to feminist consciousness in the patriarchal household of my upbringing, and I launched feminist rebellion by choosing higher education against the patriarchal beliefs of my father and the fears of my mother that too much education would leave me unfit to be a real woman. I joined feminist movement my sophomore year in college. On campuses everywhere, young women engaged in radical politics, black liberation struggle, socialism, anti-war and environmental rights, were concentrating their attention on gender. Drawing on the work of the activists who had launched women's liberation, creating manifestos and position papers, female students everywhere were encouraged to examine the past, to find and uncover our hidden stories, our feminist legacies. And while that work was happening, another field of woman-centered scholarship was coming into being: feminist theory. Unlike the feminist scholarship that was focusing on recovering past history, forgotten heroines, writers, and so on, or the work that was about documenting from a social science perspective the current realities of women's lives, initially feminist theory was the site for the critical interrogation and reimagining of sexist gender roles. It was to provide a revolutionary blueprint for the movement, one that, when followed, would lead us in the direction of transforming patriarchal culture. By the late 1970s, feminist thinkers were already engaging in dialectical critique of the feminist thinking that had emerged from late 1960s radicalism. That critique formed the basis of revisionist feminist theory. Feminist thought and practice were fundamentally altered when radical women of color and white women allies began to rigorously challenge the notion that gender was the primary factor determining a woman's fate. I can still recall how it upset everyone in the first women's studies class I attended, a class where everyone except me was white and female, and mostly from privileged backgrounds. When I interrupted a discussion about the origins of domination in which it was argued that when a child is coming out of the womb, the factor deemed most important is